Yeah, finally, I gotta adjust a little bit. I'm live again. It's 11:54 on a Tuesday, I guess. Getting ready for Thanksgiving. Back from WESTECH Performance. Did some more dyno testing this last weekend with the 4.8 liter. Lots of cool stuff to talk about. Ran the M90, the Junkyard M90 Supercharger on it again, and it did well. So, spoiler alert, made over 500 horsepower. So it did good. We'll talk about, I'm not going to give you the results of everything because I have way too many videos to do, but we'll talk about the radius air horn and the throttle body. And those definitely did work. Well, one of them worked. So you get to guess which one worked. Here are the things that I tested when I was down there. So I tested the, in fact, this could be our, start our poll. Okay, so we had a 4-inch radius air horn on it. The question is, for the poll for today, did the radius air horn actually add power? Did it indeed? Okay, so here are the things that I tested. So we put the 4.8 liter back up on the dyno. We put it on with the M90 once again. Same pulley as we ran last time. Everything was the same as we did before. The one change that I made, there are actually two changes when we ran it to begin with. The two changes were as follows. First of all, I opened up the entry of the supercharger. So I didn't go all the way out. What I wanted to do basically is I wanted to put an LS throttle body on it. And then you know how this goes is, okay, I want to put an LS throttle body on it because I want to be able to hook up the TPS and IAC. And the LS throttle body is going to be bigger anyways. So we wanted to put that on in place of the Super Richie converted drive-by-wire throttle body that I made into a manual drive-by-wire throttle body from the factory one. So I wanted to put that on there. So I thought, well, I could put a stock one on there, or I could do a 92 millimeter because we had a fast there. And so I thought, okay, let's put the fast one on there. So what's that going to take? Well, it's going to take, first of all, the opening being quite a bit bigger than it is right now. And it's also going to take an adapter plate to be able to change the bolt pattern, because the bolt pattern that they use on the supercharger, the throttle body for the supercharger for the M90, is not the same as a fast is for an LS. So I made an adapter plate. The adapter plate bolted to the flange on the supercharger and then had a bolt pattern to mount the throttle body. Very simple, except for a couple of things. One, I went out until I ran out of enthusiasm for porting, basically. I opened up the throttle opening pretty big, but not quite 92 millimeters. And then the other mistake that I made, and then I use a rough bit and I went in fairly deep into it. I didn't take the blower apart when I did this. I just stuffed rags in there. So you guys feel free to complain about that. And then, you use a fairly coarse bit to get all the big stuff out. And then you go in with a sanding roll and smooth everything out. So, so the airflow likes the nice smooth texture. So we did that. Then when I used a hole saw to cut I used a fairly thin plate, enough so that I could put countersunk bolts in it so that they were flush with the plate. And then when I bolted the throttle body on, obviously, we didn't really care too much about it leaking because I don't care about idle quality. And, once you're at wide open throttle, that leak it goes away. It's not there anymore. So we ran the plate, but when I cut the hole in the plate, I cut it with a hole saw. Well, the hole saw wasn't exactly precise in the size of the hole saw hole that we ended up with. So that hole in that adapter plate was actually bigger than the throttle body was. So we had an overhang of the plate relative to the opening in the blower housing, and then which itself was also slightly different than the 92 millimeter throttle body was. So all that wasn't perfect, but it still worked. When we put the motor up on the dyno, and the other change that I had to make, because the other thing that I did, we'll get into all of these tests because there's a lot of them, I also ran 8 O2 sensors. So we ran headers that had an O2 sensor in each cylinder, which was very good. because what I wanted to find out, and this will be in a complete video on this, is, on the supercharger, the air goes in one side into the back, let's say, of the supercharger, and then exits out the front relative to the motor I'm using back and front. And the discharge of the supercharger basically is positioned right over 4 of the runners in the Holley high ram manifold and the tunnel ram style manifold. Now there's enough distance, there's enough plenum volume inside there. People had made comments about this. There's enough plenum volume in there. Is there enough plenum volume in there for the air to make a turn and also go back to the back runners, or does it just overfill those front 4, which the opening is right above? You guys can decide. Everybody can argue about that or speculate about it. I didn't want to speculate about it. So I hooked up 802s so we could find out, was it overfilling 4 of the cylinders and not the other ones? So that was another test that we did. But in order to do that, we had to run 1 3/4 headers. And so which we did. And so the motor was initially configured with the 1 3/4 headers with the supercharger, now with a Super Richie entry and an LS throttle body on it, a 92mm throttle body. And we ran it in that configuration to start out with. Okay. Also tested the 802s to find out if there's a distribution issue in the whole design of this with the blower centered over 4 of these. We did the bubbler test or whatever, the 1/8 pipe or whatever that I took out of to see how much boost leak we got. We did a header test, 1 3/4 versus 1 7/8. We did a camshaft. So I went from the NSR Truck Norris camshaft to the Brian Tooley Racing hot rod camshaft. So we stepped up in camshaft. I also did a cylinder head test because one of the things that was necessary to put the new camshaft in there was a valve spring upgrade. Well, the valve springs that I ordered were not there in time for when I got there, actually a little early, for me to be able to do this test. So I had the 799 heads from the L33 because we had replaced those with the trick flow heads. So I had those 799 heads. They had a valve spring upgrade on them. I thought, I'm just going to change the heads. This might also be beneficial. As we know, the 799 heads flow more than the 706 heads, particularly these 706 heads. These were terrible. These were that 408 that had broken rockers and push rods and cams and all kinds of stuff filled full of soot and carbon deposits and everything. So they were, and not even probably sealed very well. The whole thing is just questionable. So we took those 706 heads off, put the 799 heads on, which we knew ran good because they just came off of the L33 when we did the cylinder head upgrade. So we put those on. We did that test. We did a cylinder head test. So we did the radius air horn test on the throttle body. So instead of just the open throttle body, we put this full radius air horn. It happened to be sitting there from testing that the guys at Engine Masters has done. It's probably Freiburgers or somebody. So I'm like, dude, I'm totally like borrowing that, at least for a test. It was easy to put on there. So we ran that. So lots and lots of testing. So let's go back to the beginning. In the beginning, God created boost. We ran the 4.8 with the blower, more ported air entry basically, and the 102mm throttle body with the 1 3/4 headers. I did some initial pulls and they were very, very promising. In fact, we'll probably talk later tonight about that part of it because something happened there and we're going to discuss that. But the upshot is this thing was making over 500 horsepower. So obviously it helped. The throttle body helped. We got more air in, boost was up just a little bit. It made more power. And then what I did also is add more timing down low from what we had done before. So everything is better. The curves, perfectly smooth and flat. It's making more power. Everything about it is good. So the little M90 will certainly support, now we know, over 500 horsepower, which is good. And then we have all these other tests to look forward to. So we got lots of good stuff coming up. In fact, I'm going to be working on the first video today about what happened, and we'll get into all that. But lots of cool stuff. The 802s will be good data. The throttle body itself, the air horn, the camshaft, the cylinder heads, headers. We 1 3/4 versus 1 7/8 headers. So there's lots of stuff to and then there's even more discussion on what's going on with the 4.8 after all that's over. So lots of good stuff. Hopefully you guys had a good weekend and A radius air horn is like a bell mouth. In fact, I can show you a picture of exactly what it looks like. So let's see here. So when I'm talking about a radius air horn, I'm talking about this. So you see, nice. It's a spun aluminum piece. Kind of folds wraps all the way around, folds into the entry of 100. That's a 92 millimeter fast throttle body on the front of the supercharger, or on the inlet of the supercharger, let's say. So that's what I'm talking about. So it's pretty cool looking. You know, it's designed to improve airflow, and that's what they do. And I'm certain that it does that. If I would have tested it on Airflow Bench, we could have had kind of back-to-back data. One of the things I wanted to hook up, which I didn't, was I wanted to hook up an air turbine. But maybe we'll have to take a look at that next time. I got a message from the guys from TIC, and they're sending out the intercooler, which will also be able to run. So lots of cool stuff. Oh, the other thing that I did that I wanted to mention is I checked air temperature from, you know, in the plenum underneath the supercharger, in the common plenum of the high ram. And the reason that I did that is because a lot of people had said in the comments, oh, you're spinning the blower at whatever 18,000 RPM, the charge temperature has to be really high. And I would always counter with, well, the air temperature is going to be a function of not so much the blower speed, but the pressure that you're supplying. And it turned out to be exactly that, because we only had charge temperatures of 179 degrees, because we only had 8.5 to 9 pounds of boost. So that's exactly what we would expect. It's not going to, oh, it's going to be way over 200 degrees. I'm like, it's not going to be 200 degrees, not at only 8 pounds or between 8 and 9 pounds. So, and actually the temperature went down as it got colder outside, because then the temperature going in would be colder, and then the temperature going out would be colder. So all of that worked out really good. So lots of good testing, lots of cool stuff. So let's see what you guys got going on. Is 1/8 inch aluminum sufficient for an intake plenum? It will be boxish under the runners in the V. Box under the runners in the V. Let's see. Uh, 125 wall. I don't think so. Depending on how much surface area that is, that might move around. Richard, I have a 2-bolt 880 Vortex block with splayed 4-bolt main caps. Do you recommend? What brand splayed 4-bolt main caps you recommend for 1,000 horsepower? Well, who do you have to choose from? Any sort of steel cap is probably, the cap itself is probably going to be stronger than the block is. So I don't think you'd have to worry about that. Who makes the caps? Does Mylodon make them? Does Dart? Who else makes them? I know I've used Mylodon stuff before. That works good. Any good sales on at Summit or Jags? I don't know. I'm not really, although I did talk to Brian today from Summit, but I didn't ask him about any sales, so I'm not sure. The last deals, let's see. Last deal with the Summit blocks is better than small 6 or 7% items I saw on sale. Hang on a second. I got to talk to Troy. Troy, what's up?
Hey, they just came and picked up the he's picking up that block.
Yeah.
And stuff. It was just the block, that little box, and the pistons, right?
Yeah, the block.
And they dropped.
They should have picked up the heads too.
Yes, and those small block heads.
Yeah, that's all. And then they left some big block heads, right?
And they left a set of big block heads.
Cool, man. Thanks.
Yep, they're on a cart sitting here.
Okay, cool. Thanks, Troy.
So you're welcome.
All right, man.
All right. Have a good one.
See ya.
All right. Bye.
Parts is parts. So I found some, that call was about, I found some small block Chevy Fuelie heads, 461. The guys at WESTECH had some. So those are going together. And they got the pistons and rods for that buildup. So that'll be good. And then also what I did, which I'm also doing a video on while I was down there, I took apart the 3800 V6 and did ring gap in preparation for the Big Bang. So Lots of good stuff. Let's see. NASCAR use restrictor plates to slow down the cars. Eventually, engineers design the airflow to regain the lost power. Yeah, and with a restrictor plate, you're still limited in the amount of airflow that you can get. What they did was make everything work better with higher compression and other things to make even a motor that only has that much airflow be able to make the power or make more power than it could. I'd say there was too much change to be able to tell, but I'd like to believe it helped 1 or 2%. I don't know what that was in response to. The most difficult part of testing has to be recreating the same variables. It's not if we just change one thing at a time. 10 thumbs up. Yeah, thank you. If you change more than one thing in testing, can you trust the results? I think you're not understanding what's going on here, but that's okay. Like I have for when I take the headlight out of the Geo. That's good. Radius air horns are good. I thought you've done some other tests with a radius inlet and got very little gains. No, I have done radius inlets on various things. On the throttle body sometimes, and again, it depends on whether there's a gain or not. That radius air horn usually will improve airflow into a throttle body or whatever. The question isn't so much that normally happens, but the question is, do you have enough motor? Is it already supplied enough airflow from what the throttle body could flow all by itself? So even if you make it bigger, it's like putting going from a 100 millimeter throttle body to a 200 millimeter throttle body. Well, if with the 200 millimeter throttle body, it certainly flows more, but if the 100 already flows, 25% more than the motor needs, the bigger throttle body is not going to do anything. Same thing with the radius air horn. If the throttle body all by itself, if somewhere else is the restriction, like the throttle body or the motor itself, and the throttle body is already big enough, then a radius air horn doesn't do anything. I've tested them on superchargers and turbos, and usually they're, especially if you're near the flow limit of those things, they tend to add power and airflow to the supercharger. Let's see. Cleaned up the combustion chamber and deshrouded the valves. Hopefully it'll help flow. Yeah, that should be good. That's always beneficial. What size port was opened for the leak test? I think it's whatever the small pipe is. Is that an 1/8? Would the M90 benefit more from a higher revving engine? This one already was going to 7,000. So my engine never got over 200. It's been running around 130 degrees. I have a 6-gallon radiator. If that's the water temperature, your water temperature should get up to whatever your thermostat is. What temps would you expect to see under a 3-liter Whipple with water intercooler with a fan? I don't know. You have to know a lot of things. You have to know what the air temperature is, what the ambient temperature is. You have to know how much boost you're making on that, for how long you're running it. What's the temperature of the water that you're using for the intercooler? Do you want the temperature between the blower and the intercooler, or are you only interested after the intercooler? Richard, did you ever test an Elgin 1839 cam? I'm not familiar with Elgin's cam numbers. The only Elgin cam, at least for the LS, I've tested 3 Elgin cams for the LS, but I don't know what the part numbers are. I don't know if that 1839 is one of them or not. And I've tested the sloppy stage 2, and then 2 other, I think, smaller ones maybe than the sloppy stage 2. I'd have to go back. The video's up. I have an Elgin video up that shows the other 2 besides the sloppy stage 2. We got a set of 1:9 ratio LS rockers on my 5.9 Magnum with a set of LS springs, I'm sure, is a stock cam. Do you think that the high ratio, the spring has more control over the lifter and push rod? What springs do you have? And what is the lift that you're getting to? Why do you have a 1:9 ratio rocker? I haven't even heard of those for an LS. I have for the 3800, but not for the LS. The thing that I would be concerned with is I don't know what the stock Magnum rockers are stamped steel, right? I'd be worried, first of all, that you have enough spring pressure to not get into valve float with that rocker ratio, and because of the weight and the ratio change. My eBay GT45 took a dump in less than 1,000 miles. Mine have lasted like 10 years. Speaking of heads, it would be nice to see what a head upgrade does for a stock engine. Not very much. I've done that test on an LS3, a ported set of LS3 heads on an otherwise stock LS3 made 10 horsepower. Thanks for all the work. You definitely make the automobile community better. Thank you. Thank you for watching. I have a billet distributor that can go 8,000 RPM sitting around. I will install it again this month on my truck. Cool. Against the block, then fits the cylinder banks, then straight up to a base that would be 1/2 inch mated to the intake runners. It's an M117 V8. Heavy mods to the plenum show significant increases. I don't know what, Jason, I don't know what all that is about. Interested in the loss of the H port, but the bubbler ports are 3/8. It's going to be more because it was about 3 or 4/10 of a pound, I think, at an eighth. 1839 is the 220, 224. 1840 is the 228. Oh, so is that the sloppy stage 1 camshaft then? I've tested cams that are 220, 224. TrickFlow had one, which probably was that Elgin cam. If you're going to do heads, I guess you could do a cam instead, but sometimes it's cheaper and easier to do a head grade. If a person doesn't want to change the power curve too much, would be another. On an LS, especially particularly a cathedral port LS, and particularly on a 4.8 or a 5.3, I wouldn't do a ported head if I didn't have a camshaft in it. If I had a stock camshaft in it, I wouldn't do a ported head. It already has more than enough head flow. On other applications, you might gain more, like on a 5-liter Ford, you're going to gain more from that because that head flows terribly. But a factory LS head flows what, and maybe more than even a ported like 5-liter Ford head. So it's already a really good cylinder head. Would you be worried about spinning a Gen 3 5.3 to 7,500? I don't want to drop the loaner to 7,000. Am I just being a worrywart? The short block stuff I wouldn't worry about. As long as your valve train is right, 7,500 is not a problem. I drove my truck build last night. It popped wheelies and pulled out at 60 miles an hour on my Denali. Cool. Pop wheelies. It's hard to get a car to do a wheelie. They are a set of Speedmaster tie bar rockers, and it's a set of eBay springs and retainers. Okay. Only after the intercooler around 80 ambient with only idle, no boost intercooler between the motor and Whipple saying 128. You don't need to look at your temperatures at idle. That doesn't mean anything. You need to be looking at your temperatures at wide open throttle. I've got 3,000 miles on it, runs 1270s, 3,200 pound car with a stock stall 323 gears, 87 octane. Cool. TrickFlow 220, 224 is the same as the 1839. I've run that camshaft way back. I ran that 220, 224 cam. In fact, I ran that on the motor, and that video is up. I ran that on the motor that had the Vortec twin screw supercharger. That's when they were dabbling in the positive displacement stuff. Andy, a TBI 350 could benefit from a better set of cylinder heads. Although a TBI is going to have a really, really small. Let's see if I can get that to do that. It's going to have a really small mild. Okay, come on. How did I do my magic thing? I just want to see if there's a. Just still trying to figure out a sequence there. James, the poll is up. Did the radius air horn add power to the supercharged 4.8 liter? 179 degrees inlet air temperature. What temperature you expect if it's intercooled? That's not very high, so there's less to knock out, but I would think that it would be closer to 100 or maybe even under 100, depending on the temperature of the water that we're going to use. We should get Richard a new camera. I have a new camera. I have a manual focus camera, except I don't like it. I got it and tried it and didn't really like it. Did not really like it. But I'm excited about being over 500 horsepower with a little M90. Yeah, Andy, that's a really mild camshaft in that throttle body injected one. A lot of that factory stuff is in the, like 190 is what an LM7 or LR4, the 4.8 or 5.3 LS is, the truck applications. And you see that some of them go even down into the 180s. Did you already run the test? Yes, I was down there this weekend and ran a bunch of tests on the LS. Ran headers and cylinder heads. What else? 802s. Something else. Headers, heads. Oh, camshaft. Even the big blocks were 190s. Yeah, they're pretty tiny. Trying to get all that torque. As people tell me, oh, those cams get lots of torque. I'm like, no, they get less torque actually than another bigger, better camshaft. It's just that they idle really nice. So we can go down now to, how's our poll doing? 78% saying yes. Did the air horn add power? We'll go to live chat. So we are live, and the answer to the poll is no, it did not. It did not add power. I'm sure that it added airflow, at least potential airflow, but since it already had enough, the air horn didn't do anything. I was very disappointed. I thought that was going to be a big thing, but it did not add any power. So that's one of the no power tests. But lucky for me, putting the air horn on takes all of 10 or 15 seconds. So that was a pretty quick one. Wonder what a set of AFR 265s would do on a stock can 454. I think that 265 you can get in a smaller chamber than the 120 that probably would come on most of those, unless you're doing it to a Gen 6, then that would be a different story because that's 102. So I was thinking the 92 was so much more than what the engine could use. It is. Well, and it might be that engine could use a 92, but the inlet going into the blower is still not 92 all the way through. So it's got a restriction somewhere else. Now that I say that out loud, I think I should have run a vacuum test in the port before the supercharger, back in the inlet of the blower. Looking for an all-around cam for an 09 Hemi truck. Is there something similar to the Truck Norris cam for the Chryslers? Yeah, Comp makes some small ones I've tested that are good. And also, if you wait just a little bit, in fact, a week or two, Brian Tooley Racing has a bunch of new Hemi cams. And they may call one of them a Truck Norris cam. If they're smart, they would. It's better a tall deck or a short deck block. You have to be more specific about what you're asking. think the air horn will work better on a larger blower. I think the blower was tapped out. It is. It is and it isn't. We were able to get more power after that. But the supercharger is definitely limiting things in terms of, you know, how things are going to add power and how much they're going to add. Because spinning the blower at that speed, the best that we could hope for is that we get more airflow in, and that, you know, we want that to happen. But if we improve the efficiency of the motor, we're going to get less pressure and hopefully more flow. It's a little bit of work now. I wonder if a 20 horsepower gain on a small block or big block would be possible. Yes, 20 horsepower would definitely be possible on a big block, from some of their stock heads. Particularly, I think a set of peanut port heads, a stock set of peanut port heads, if you went to a 265 head, you probably could get 20 even without changing the cam, I would think. Get more power by opening up the flow post blower, right? The major gains actually come from the inlet side of the blower. The discharge side, I could port the opening, the V-shaped opening, and we could improve things there. In fact, I brought a blower home with me to send to the guys from Jokers, and they're going to port that blower. So we'll have some data on what a ported blower does. And I think maybe I'll try to speed the blower up relative to the engine also. How much better are the Eaton TVS blowers compared to the early ones? They are better, but I don't know that I've seen a direct back-to-back test of the same displacement supercharger. Sometimes when they've gone to the TVS, they have a new housing and then they have a new throttle, new throttle size that comes into play. I haven't seen a structured test where you're just comparing with no other changes, just the efficiency of the change in a twisted lobe design. I haven't seen that. Usually there's some other change. You can put an M90 on the Atlas if that's your question. Are you still planning on doing a big bang? Not on a 360 Chrysler. I'm not planning on doing a big bang on that. The next one that I'm doing is the 3800, the V6. And so in fact, they just picked up the motor today, the block, because I stripped it all down and did ring gap on it. And the interesting thing on the 3800, and this will come out in the video, is on the 3800, the stock ring gap on the top ring was 22 thousandths. The stock ring gap, and I say stock, it's the way that I got it from the wrecking yard, but they're all consistent. So I'm assuming that that's the factory ring gap, and nothing was cut on the ring. So the rings were what they were. There doesn't look like there's appreciable wear. There's no ridge on the top. So I'm assuming that that's the way that this thing came. So it had 22 thousandths ring gap on the top ring, and it had a lot on the second ring, like 30. So I didn't even have to change the gap in the second ring. I only changed the gap in the first ring and the top ring. So we'll see what happens. It's got enough ring gap now where we can run a lot of boost on it. So what I'm doing is having them doing a skim cut on the deck for two reasons, so that we can make sure that it's flat, and also so that it has the right finish for MLS head gasket. So I have head studs for it, and we'll put that on with the ported heads. And then I have a custom cam that I did, and then we'll run a turbo on it, or turbos, and see what happens. Some dart big gun blocks have short decks. Some block has tall decks. What's better? There's no better there. You would have a block based on what size you eventually want to make the motor. If you're using a tall deck block, sometimes it's because guys want to make a really big motor, and they want to have a lot of stroke. They want to have, a reasonable rod length, because, rod ratio. And so they'll use a taller deck. But one of them is not universally better than the other. Sometimes people want short deck stuff because it brings the weight down. It's better for packaging, better for handling, better for braking, better for all that stuff. And if you're using a short stroke deal, then that's all you need. I am planning on Terry. I am planning on running the 360 with boost, but just not all of the boost. I don't really have good enough cylinder heads, I don't think, to make that happen. An Iron Duke would be a good punching bag for some of these small blowers and turbos. I agree. I think that the M90 would be good if applied to the Trophy 4-cylinder or any of the other, like that inline 6-cylinder, like the Slant 6 or the 292 Chevy. All of those would be good with some kind of roots blower on them. I want to try to get, I think ZZP, which I want to reach out to. I think that they make a 2.4-inch pulley. And so we'd have to machine down the shaft a little bit more. I just took a grinder and ground it so that the 2.4 will actually fit over. But what I'm thinking more along the lines of now is a cog pulley. Because the other thing that would be nice is to get rid of the accessories that I have to run. To do a 572, do we need a tall deck dart M block? No, you don't. Are you stuck on that displacement? I don't think that I'm just looking up a crate motor now. I don't think the crate motors are done with tall deck blocks. A cog would be good. Just, you know, there's no belt slippage now. We're seeing that on the data log. It's really consistent. And right now we're just using a 6-rib. One thing I did do this time is, and the data logs, I have the data logs from last time and from this time. In fact, I brought the data logs back with me so I can employ them in the video. But the boost pressure is nice and consistent. We're not seeing a belt slippage issue because that would be evident in the data log. But one thing I did do this time is I actually put another idler in the setup. I just stacked washers and had an idler and put it in as a long hold down bolt for the power steering bracketry that bolts onto the head. So I put another idler in there so that when the belt wraps around the blower pulley, it comes down and kind of comes together. So it adds a little bit of belt wrap there and gets rid of some of the unsupported length of the belt, which is also good. For anyone who may be thinking about buying Edelbrock 290 big block heads, there are some bad core shift. The short turn is pretty much non-existent, along with having a big ridge just above the valve. That's not good. I think that, I wonder if Vortec has cog pulleys for these. Because I would also like to get a different crank pulley. So a cog would be nice. I always wondered how bad the angles are on the exhaust and intake ports. I've always suspected the ports are less than optimum. They're like an LS Cathedral port. We got the ported ones we got the flow rate up on the ported heads. And so none of that is going to be a restriction on the on turboing the 3800. We'll be able to make way more power than the motor will stand. I mean, I think that they flow 220 or something like that, which is, was a big step up from what it was originally. And so I'm hoping with the cam and those ported heads and the intake manifold that we can get this thing, I don't know, somewhere near 300 NA, which would be good. It's been so long since we ran that. Look up my intake test. Let's see. V6 mods. Man, I got a lot of V6 tests. Cam swap. Final stock cam. Yeah, so we're near 250. So I don't know. I kind of think that we might get there. Stock bottom end. Stock L32 heads. L67 throttle body, no inlet air, comp cam, stock lower, L67 intake, hollow, L67 blower intake, stock rockers. Yeah. So I'm thinking we probably could get better than that. I thought that we were in the 260 range for these things. Okay, here we go. Long, short, open. Yeah, 267. So that was with the aluminum blower housing, a gutted one. Headers, the ZZP cam. I don't know if this one had. No, these are not ported heads, I don't think. Yeah, so there's more. There's more there. Yeah, and actually 277 with the back of the plenum opened up. So I think we'll be close. The Edelbrock heads flow tested, they were down 30 CFM from advertised. That seems like a lot. Yeah, you're right. That's not a bench to bench difference. Sent the M112 blower pics to Instagram. Sorry, I'm late. Leg's not working. Uh-oh. Funny how 220 is a step up. I know. I wish that they flowed what like a stock set of 799 heads flow. That would be really nice. I'm just going to ask someone else so they can do a full video talking about the 572. Yeah, I thought we answered your question. I thought that everybody here tried to help and answer your question. You've done this radius test before? Yes, but not that one, and not on this supercharged motor. Is a horn also a good shape for the other end? For example, on an intake manifold, horns before the throttle body and then reversed horn into the plenum. The air entry before the throttle body helps airflow into the throttle body. And most intake runners have a radius entry into the runner, if that's what you're talking about. I want to know what the stock LZ9 heads flow. I don't know. I've never even seen one. The radius, I ran a radius air horn on a couple of different superchargers. I ran one on a Torque Storm, and that definitely improved power. And then we ran one on a Pro Charger. I think it was an F1A90. 94 probably, and that helped as well. It definitely improves the power. Because and like I said, these things come into play when you are getting near the flow limit of stuff and when it needs the extra airflow. When it doesn't need it, if you've got a 1300 horsepower blower and you're making 600 and you put a radius entry on it, it's already doing what it's supposed to be doing. Come on, come back. Stupid camera. LZ9. I know what the LZ9 is. I just have never even seen one though. I was kind of happy that when I was taking apart the 3800 that the second rings were already pre-gapped. They had a lot of gap. I was surprised that they were that much. I put the feeler gauge in there. I'm like, oh yeah, wiggling around. That's a lot. I think the air horn will work on a bigger throttle bike. It will. That's what we just talked about. That if you're taxing out the airflow of the thing, and then you put a radius air horn on it, it will flow more, and then it will take advantage of that extra airflow. I got a close look at the split pin crank on the 3800. I'm wondering about that. But we'll see. V6s are cool though. The pistons look pretty stout. The factory ones do. They have pretty good sized ring lands. Should be pretty strong, especially now we've got the ring gap in them. I made sure to label them so I know how to put it back together. Richard, what engine bay do you think would fit a 120 degree V6? It's almost a boxer, but more awkward. What motor is that? What has 120 degrees? You need to go the other way. A 4-liter? You're gonna have to lay that underneath a Porsche or something, right? Oh, an airplane motor. A Testarossa, if you want to swap your Testarossa V6, swap your Testarossa. I think an M112 would go good to the 3800. Yeah, it would. It's a bigger blower, so it can definitely make more power. I put the Kenny Bell on there, and it definitely made more power. Anything bigger is going to be better. We just put a 2650 on there, or a 2.8 liter, or a 3.6 liter Kenny Bell. It'd just be ridiculous. Or we could just put a single turbo on there and make all the power. Yeah, Jason, all I could say is you could try it. I tried making manifolds with like sheet stuff, and I don't remember what the thickness was, and it did move around quite a bit though. Burns, how about a golf cart? In the back of the golf cart, right? It'd even be wide for like a motorcycle or a trike. What's the back of a smart car look like? I don't think I've seen that. That would be cool. I'll have to check it out. Need the narrow angle V6. It's like an inline or the W motors. Consider we've only seen them in our rear view instead of reviews. I don't think anybody knows what the back of a smart car looks like. We've seen some fast ones though, some Hayabusa swapped ones and stuff. I don't think the smart car would be wide enough. Yeah, but then that gives you the excuse to do a wide body smart car. You know, like an old IMSA GTO bodied thing. Because everything needs wide bodies. Because your smart car, it's got to have back, right? It's got to have back and it's got to have stance. 76% are still saying yes. I already gave you the answer. I'm thinking bang for the buck that a blower costs $125. Put a 3800 in a Fiero. Be a great autocross. Yeah, the 3800 swap is common in the Fiero, and they work really good. It makes lots of power. One of the viewers on here has one in his. But I think I would pick something that's lighter, though, maybe. Wanting 500 horsepower from a 4.8. Is a bigger blower always better for less heat, or is there a drag trade-off? 2.3 Magson versus a 4-liter Whipple. If you only want 500 horsepower, I wouldn't pick a 4-liter Whipple. That's you're only a third of the way of what that blower could probably do. So you should pick a smaller one than that. It'll be more responsive. Because if you have to slow your 4-liter down enough to where it only makes 500 at the top, it's going to be really soft down low. Oh, there you go, Burns. I didn't think about that. A Corvair. And if it's back there, you can do wheelies in it, right? Wow. I think they almost have at WESTECH, they almost have the fuel injected 283 ready to run. I think that they were going to try to run it, and then they needed an anti-drain back valve or something for the fuel injection so that it doesn't leak all the fuel into the motor. Is there a heat trade-off? You mean a heat trade-off between both of them running at the same boost level? What will happen is if you did that, if you have to, again, it's a difficult comparison to do because they're going to have such dramatically different boost curves and flow potentials. But if you ran a 4-liter and a 2.3 and they both made 500 horsepower at the same RPM, you'd have wildly different blower pulleys on them. The 4-liter would likely take less power to drive than the smaller one would because it's spinning faster. The temperature should be very comparable since temperature is primarily a function of the boost pressure. But even if you ultimately had more power at the tire with a 4-liter because you had slightly less parasitic loss, it's not going to be dramatic, especially at that power level. But you have to deal with it being much less responsive. A 2300 for 500 horsepower is the right turbo, is the right supercharger to have. That's if you have the choice between those two, that's the one you should put on there. It's because 500 horsepower is going to be hardly any boost at all. Richard, since this is a 100 horsepower junkyard blower, are there any $100 junkyard turbos for a horsepower shootout? I don't need to do a blower versus turbo thing. I've already done that 4 times. So I think we know what happens there. I don't know if there maybe one of the diesel turbos would go to 500-600 horsepower. I don't know if there is a single one that will do that. Eric, I will be on tonight, I think. An HX 45 for 600 horsepower. What's that going to come off of, though? Is that going to be off of a which turbo diesel will be that on? Will that be on? Maybe you got to go to a big rig junkyard. The M90 Supercharger makes similar results on a small block Chevy 305 5-liter. Yes, the Supercharger doesn't care what motor it's on. What it cares about is how fast you're spinning it relative to the motor and what the original NA power output is. So if you have a 5-liter 305, there's a good chance, unless you've heavily modified it, that it makes less power than this 4.8 does. And so the M90 Supercharger, we already know it will support this power level. And so it will work fine on that, as long as you have to build an adapter plate for it to make it work, though. People ask about junkyard turbos. I remind them about max speeding. That's the thing. There's such, I don't know why you'd go to a wrecking yard. Although I don't even know, can you even buy a turbo for $100 anymore at a wrecking yard? As far as a 1.9 rockers, it was a cheap way to get a lot of lift, close to 480. They were a direct bolt-on. All I had to do was change the fastener and the push rods. The rockers are out of a 3.3-liter GM. An HX45 might do 600 horsepower. A better housing would definitely probably get that. Yeah. On discount day, yeah. But Burns, what did the HX45 come in? It wasn't in a it wasn't in a Cummins, right? And was it in a Ford or a Chevy turbo diesel? Around here, it used to be $30. It could be up to $60 these days for a turbo. That's cheap for a turbo. Long-time listener, first-time poster. Is there a relationship between engine displacement and intake runner length to produce peak torque in the same RPM range? The reflected wave is, there are 3 forms of charge filling associated with the Supercharger. So the answer is maybe, or partially. The reflected wave is irrespective of displacement, but the inertial ram filling is a function of displacement. And the Helmholtz resonance is also a function of displacement, but that has little to do with that. They are Speedmaster. The push rods are out of the 3.3. I know you've done Supercharger versus Turbo. I'm talking specifically the $100 one. Okay. Again, we don't, unless the HX will do that, it's hard to find a turbo in this power range that will do what the blower does. But if they're $30, then we could do twins. So then you could do, twins for that price, twin turbos. Cummins, I thought maybe it was a Power Stroke diesel. I don't remember either, but if they're cheap enough, like I said, you could get 2 of them. Get the deuce. Poor little 4.8 liter. It's got several hundred runs on it now. Alexis, is that what it is? I changed all my lifters on my LS engine for LS7 lifters, but it sounds like a loud sewing machine. I measure my push rod length with your video. I do 1 1/8 turn with a 7.4 inch. Do I have to take 7/450? No. If you have an 1 1/8 worth of preload, it works just fine. If you have 1 1/8 turn of prelude, that's fine. If you have 1 1/4 or 1 1/2, that also works. I know because I just did that on the 4.8. And I also did less because when I changed the camshaft from the Truck Norris NSR cam to the hot rod cam, we definitely had a change in base circle, but I just kept the same push rods. With putting a divider in the Holly Ram to make it more like a twin plenum work, I would say no, because I tried that on the single plane and it didn't work. James, is who running enough lift to require a trunnion upgrade? My rockers don't have a trunnion upgrade on the 4.8. Those could actually probably use a rocker upgrade. Those are probably old and tired. Those are probably old and tired, and we're going to get rid of our poll at 76% saying yes, it does improve the airflow, but unfortunately, it did not improve power. I was very disappointed because it looked super cool. When I was actually discovered the Radius air horn by accident. I was walking over back to the front of WESTECH to get a drink or whatever, and I'm like, oh, look at that. Oh, that's awesome. That's definitely going on there. And yet... one more minute. Yeah, it's good to be back. Wow. I'm excited. I'm excited about the 3800 Turbo. I'm excited about the L78. I'm excited about some other stuff. I want to put a 557 forward to my Chevy dually. That's good. Dualies need big blocks. That's for certain. Hurting for certain. And I have 112 messages I got to look at. That's a lot. And on that note, it is time to go, but I'll see you guys more than likely back again tonight. I got more stuff to cover on the 4.8 testing, lots of cool stuff. And so that means we have some really good polls to come up with because I get to ask questions that nobody knows the answers about, except for me, because I did all the testing. Thank you guys all for showing up. I will be back tonight.